We're at the site of, I think, one of the most important Roman villas that's been uncovered in Britain in the last decade, possibly even longer. We've been lucky enough to be coming to the Brookside Meadows site in Oxfordshire for the last 6 months, and every time we come, we seem to find another incredible aspect to this story of Roman Britain. From the original winged corridor villa, with its incredible painted plaster, mosaics, to this magnificent aisled building that I'm walking through at the moment. But the finds are also telling us another story about a ritual community focus over hundreds of years that would have made this site stand out, not just in terms of its magnificent architecture, but also what it meant to the people who lived in this area. Louis, Brookside Meadows, there's a lot going on. Could you, if possible, just sort of give us a summary? Because we've got, as I understand it, we've got potentially a villa complex, we've got the aisled building, and then we've got something else maybe going on as well that's perhaps more of a ritual element. Is that correct? If you were sort of giving a summary, how would you describe this remarkable site?
We've definitely got a villa complex. There's another aisled building. Still unpicking beyond that, but there is an element that there might be something ritual on site just because of the sheer quantity of finds and the types of finds.
And then, so what kind of dates are we looking at? Are we looking at a spread of hundreds of years for this site, do you think?
This site, we think it probably goes, there'll be an element of bronze all the way through the Iron Age, and then the Iron Age transitions nicely into the Roman, and then there's at least 2 phases of Roman here. So we've got an early Roman phase and then the building these monuments, and those might be split as well, so it looks to go all the way through the Roman period.
And I just would like to focus a bit where we're standing at the moment on the site of the aisled building. What do you understand of an aisled building is, and would this have been, I imagine, chalk built, possibly plastered? Would this be sort of standing out in the landscape? Because I understand you're quite interested in how things fit into this wider landscape.
Don't know exactly what it is, because like I said, this is early. It is a large building. It would have been imposing. More than likely it was white on the outside, because generally they do that. Some sort of lime wash, same as Hadrian's Wall, would have been a white gleaming visage across the horizon. Something similar to that. We don't know what function it is yet, but there's not an awful lot of it left above ground, so we don't have intact surfaces that we know of, but that might change as we dig.
Aisled buildings seem to date from the late 1st century AD, with most constructed in the 2nd century before declining in popularity in the 4th century. After construction, these hall-like structures might then be developed into a villa themselves, becoming part of a wider villa complex, or even replace the original villa. To date, 4 huge potential column or post bases for an internal colonnade have been uncovered in the aisled building that, at around 500 square metres, is one of the larger examples of its type from the entirety of Roman Britain. This building is immediately adjacent to what we call a winged corridor villa, a high-status domestic structure with a central range and flanking wings of rooms accessed by a central corridor, hence the name. To get a better idea about the chronology and layout of the site, I've asked the site director, Francesca Giarelli, and project manager, Louis Stafford, to tell me a little bit about the large and complex archaeological site at Brookside Meadows.
At Brookside Meadow, we can see a very long-lived occupation. We have few hints of a Bronze Age occupation, and then the site seems to flourish and have more people. For sure, during the Iron Age, we can see on the north part of the site especially, we have like few enclosures, few roundhouses, and then after that probably the same people will get Romanized when the Roman conquest starts. And they start building like the first west villa, then probably the north villa, and at some point they become richer or they expand themselves, they demolish the west villa and build the hill building. And after that, all the buildings go down in ruin, most likely. They get robbed, and there is probably a faint, like, medieval occupation.
The big push here for population is in the Iron Age, and it seems like they were well established at that point, and so much so that they probably had enough wealth and Romanized and constructed the buildings we've got on site. And again, they dismantled and robbed right at the end of their use, and we might have, like I said, faint traces, or potentially hinting at something that's slightly post-Roman.
Assessments change regularly on major archaeological projects such as Brookside Meadows, from the initial desk-based assessments created in advance of excavation to the finds made on a daily basis. And who better to discuss this with us than Site Director Francesca Giarelli.
Before you do a dig like this, you do what is known as a sort of desk-based assessment, but am I right in thinking that it wasn't necessarily showing the kind of wealth of material that we're finding now?
No, the desk-based assessment wasn't really hinting to this much material, or like there were suggestions of possibility of a building, but it was suggested like a small building and not where we found our building, like more on the northern field. So yeah, we expected a lot of ditches, postholes, these kind of things, the more like normal rural archaeology, but not this much complexity.
What we got here always makes archaeologists excited. I think everyone thinks archaeologists, need to have a mosaic to be excited on a Roman site. But there's another category of evidence that we've got here. Could you just tell us a little bit about how exciting this is, and just a little the colours that we can see on this this painted plaster that we've got?
Yeah, as you said, we have a bit of painted plaster, and it's as rare as mosaic, especially with these vivid colors still in place. We can see on the bits of like the pieces that we have in our hands a bit of purple that is very prominent, but also in yours there are hints of green.
Yeah, I can see it there. And I think we've even got ones down here that you were pointing out earlier. That we can see there's more
green.
And when you see them in concert, you can see that there's maybe that's some sort of floral scene or something. They kind of like to pretend they're kind of looking in the outdoor world and
looking outside.
Looking inside, and you get that even in Imperial Rome itself. You've got the Livia's room in the museum in Rome, and it's this idea that you're this fantasy that you're outside even though you're inside.
And Francesca and I decided to move inside ourselves in order to take a closer look at some of the truly remarkable finds emerging from the earth at Brookside Meadows, with a painted wall plaster being discovered ranking as one of the finest collections in Britain to date, even at this early stage of investigation of only part of the villa complex. So, Francesca, we've got some of the amazing finds from this spectacular Monk's Farm site here. Could you just start telling us a few, maybe your favourite ones, or ones that you think maybe tell us something about the story and the history of this site?
So my favourite one is, if you look on this table, is probably the one that tells the least. It's like this bone carved tool.
All right, okay, what's that?
Well, it might look nothing special. It's just even like a bit rough carved, but it's a little stylus. So it will be used for writing up things.
Oh, fantastic. Is that on, you get like a wax tablet? Like you get, is it the Vindolanda tablets that you get? Okay.
That, obviously we don't have the tablet, sadly, but we still have this.
But we know they were writing.
They will writing. And it might be used for normal writing up, like a Vindolanda, the like simple letters that the soldiers
about underpants. Yeah. A lot of them seem to be about underpants. Yeah.
Yeah, and about beer or like
beer and underpants. That's like 90% of my WhatsApps these days. Yeah, but that is just, and it's because it's bone. It's got that sort of sheen to it as well.
Exactly.
Just knowing that a Roman was writing cursive on this like 2,000 years ago is just
and now we have that here.
This is fantastic. Well, okay. Well, that's one of your favourites. What else is special about this site? Is there any finds here that you'd like to show?
Well, I think the site favourite is this little buckle here. So this is a quite rare type. As you can see, it has two horses' head or griffons. We're not entirely sure about. depending on what you want to see on it. And it's quite rare. It's usually associated with more funeral environments, so with graves. And it's spaced, like there are examples that goes from the Iron Age or Saxons.
Oh, right, okay, so again, that's telling a story we don't know yet.
Yeah,
but
we can, because that's a story that is so wide.
Yeah.
It's telling that this site has been occupied for a very long time.
That's beautiful. I'm just going to look at that myself. And it's got those sort of beautiful,
it's beautifully carved
dots on them as well, and see the back of it. And so that was maybe for clothing. There'd be a leather belt on something like this, or
yeah, there will be a leather belt kind of situation, and then it will be just keeping it in place.
Fantastic, the world without zips. Yeah. Okay, now, what's another thing that might tell us maybe a bit about the wealth or the ambition of the site?
Well, for the wealth of ambition, we have two sides of it. One, it's the villa itself. We know that the villa are painted plaster, and we have very rare colors on this. And one, it's the blue and greens. And these are quite rare to find. Obviously, blue and green will be pigment, but they need to be imported for quite far away.
And where? I mean, I've heard something about the blue. Is that coming from Afghanistan? Even is that
Yeah.
lapis lazuli
Yeah.
or
So yeah, he would have traveled through the entire empire for getting here, basically.
to get to, and we found this in a
Yeah.
field in Oxfordshire.
Exactly,
Incredible.
and it's still like it's vibrant.
It's beautiful. Yeah, we'll get some close-ups of that as well. But we've got even more, don't we? Because that's one of the...
we have even more. Like we can kind of imagine that these walls will have different bands, red and white, and then blue and green.
That's
and there's the red,
fabulous.
the two different reds and the white.
So this is a high status villa.
It's for sure a high status villa, and even if without the plaster itself, we would have a plethora of finds indicating it. One, for example, might be this ring. It's a silver ring.
Oh my goodness.
That has a little duck.
That's incredible. Fantastic. And we think that'll be Roman sort of a decent high status.
Sure. Yeah, Roman decent high status. Obviously silver is a precious material itself. And that will do half of it. But not only that, we also have this brooch. It's again, there are a few examples in the British Museum, but there are not that many around.
Oh, it's that level of...
Yeah, that level of special. And you can see that as a golden
oh yeah,
shine.
It's gilded.
It's gilded golden.
So we're getting an idea now. We can sort of build up that picture that someone's sitting there writing on a wax tablet. They've got very nice clothes on. They've got their whatever togas or whatever the British variant of that, and they've got these beautiful brooches and rings.
Exactly.
So this is going to be important. Family, probably their wealth is sheep farming. I think Roman Britain produces a lot of wool, so maybe they're getting their wealth from the fields around here, and then they've used their wealth to create a spectacular site. The Roman state was in Britain for short of 400 years, but at sites like Brookside Meadows, you can really see the impact on the landscape. People will know about Julius Caesar's expeditions, they'll know about the invasion of Claudius and the later history of Septimius Severus. Rome was intertwined with the history of Britain from the 1st century BC until the 5th century AD. And this site tells that story, and that's why Brookside Meadows is so important.
And it's a story that's constantly evolving, with each new trench and every scrape of a trowel revealing more insights into the period and, just as frequently, forcing us as archaeologists to consider new questions and possible interpretations.
I'm here with Phil, and we've got yet another sort of interesting, we'll say enigmatic feature that Phil is trying to figure out. So we'll take over to Phil, one of our expert diggers, to what may be happening here, but it's an evolving story. So Phil, what do you think you've got here?
Well, originally when we machined the topsoil up, I found these two random placed stones, but the only thing I can possibly suggest they were post pads. So a post pad where, rather than dig a post hole, you sit a wooden beam on top of the post and it stops sinking. And then cleaning around, lots of burn features, and I come across this burn feature. So put in the section through, you can see there's actually wood in situ.
Oh yeah.
So there's a square beam in here, which when I dug this part out, I sampled 4 buckets of organic sample material to go back to the office. But my plan is to go on this section and that one, then perhaps 100% this small slot, and it should show burnt timber in situ, which would be cool.
And your interpretation at the moment is evolving, but what are you thinking it could be?
We've got to the extremities of the side. It's rising up here and rising up the other side, so it's a large feature underneath a Roman occupation there. So it must predate the Romans. I haven't had any. Well, I've had lots of pot. There are possible pieces of pot in there. I haven't had a good look at them.
For a site that has pretty much everything, the challenge for archaeologists like Phil and his colleagues is to establish order and map the complex series of intercutting sequences and phases across the site. This is achieved by the creation and ongoing evolution of the site plan, which Francesca showed me as we looked at the features.
So at the moment we are standing just west of this wall, this the one on the floor, and between the wall there is a corridor or another very big room, and then a series of 3 rooms, and then there will be another corridor and one of the wing of the villa possibly. Behind us we have the other building with the smelter, with the heart, and again it's formed by 1 room, and then there is a smaller one and a bigger one, probably a corridor and another very square room there. If we go north from that building, we'll find the possible foundation with the wooden structure on top, and then northern from them there are the 2 corn dryers.
Famous corn dryers, there we go.
Corn dryers, yes.
While we as archaeologists know quite a lot about ovens designed to dry cereals for storage, they are, after all, relatively common on Roman and potentially post-Roman sites such as Brookside Meadows. We have some features at Grove that will require more investigation before we can make further interpretations as to their dating and purposes.
So we're coming over to, and I've dug Roman and early medieval sites, but it's still always a bit weird when you get into this period in between potentially the Roman period and the early medieval period. And this, from my perspective, what I think, this looks like one of these kind of post-Roman phases. Is that maybe what we're coming to here?
So it sure looks like it's post-Roman stuff, or at least post-villa, because in this weird structure, we call it the mystery feature as well.
The mystery feature, I love it.
The mystery feature, because it's not really clear what is its purpose for. We have hypotheses, but what it's for, we don't know. As I said, it's for sure after the villa was destroyed, because in one side of it we have 2 fragments of box tiles.
Hey, we'll have a go and look at that, yeah.
Yeah, and this will, obviously, this is not their original position. This will be used next to the hypocaust for convey the heat of the hypocaust through the villa. And so obviously they are not where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
They used it in whatever this is. And because of that, they're probably, yes, post-Roman. So more early medieval. That weird transitional phase where they're not quite Saxon yet, but they're not still Roman.
This is like gold dust for archaeology, if I'm correct, because we really don't know what's happening after the Romans kind of leave. At least they leave in an administrative sense, and the money stops coming in. This is kind of the world that we're in after that point, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, because obviously the Roman left us a lot of structure and things that are easy to understand, but also they left us a lot of like scripts, treaty, everything. Like they've wrote a lot, and we almost know what's going on there. But yeah, when they leave, and when there is that transitional phase, then most of we lost most of what was happening. And obviously they didn't descend in a complete chaos. They still had they still had normal life to carry on. There must have been like big things going on, but the people living here, for them was important to carry on their life. And probably most of them activity were related to that structure over there.
So it's a sort of T-shaped structure potentially we're seeing here, or at least it's part of that. It's angular.
Yeah, it will be a T-shaped structure. Half of it is still under the bulk, so we cannot see it in total. But this is what we call a corn dryer. That's another term that really went off use as a cereal dryer.
Right. Okay. So that is just to explain that's because if you once you've harvested the grain, it's got moisture in it, and it'll basically rot unless you kind of dry that moisture out. Yeah.
Mediterranean will use the sun. Obviously, England is not very sunny.
Nope.
So they come with this pretty, ingenious thing that is a corn dryer. So you should imagine this completely empty. Obviously, the soil is something that happened after, and at that end, the bottom of the tea, there will be a fire.
Yeah.
And then the hot air from the fire will circulating in the inside, and on top of this, there will be another wooden structure, most likely, and that the cereal will be put on the floor of that, and then.
And I think people see that now with whiskey. If they've got the barley out on the floor and they have to turn it, and it's the warm air from that takes away that moisture, and that means that it won't start sprouting.
Exactly.
And turning basically into seed. So this again, this is what you were saying just a moment ago. This idea that we get, that we don't really know what's happening. We think it's potentially quite lawless at times. There's sort of potentially sort of invasions. There's post-Roman political structures and sort of tribes almost re-emerging. But I think this maybe tells us that this is the daily life. You still have to eat. You can't go more than 2 or 3 days. So regardless of all these big historical themes, you still have to have your bread.
Exactly. You can survive without pretty pottery, but you cannot survive without your bread. And yeah, it seems that the average person was concentrating in keep going and keep their life as much normal as possible.
There are other, I think, Chedworth Roman villa as well. It's got evidence for, again, they're drying corn.
Yep.
They're digging up mosaics. So you've got this nice Roman spolia. You've got these Roman remains around you. But you just have to think, I need to eat today, and you will dig up a mosaic surface if that means that you can get your corn or your grain dry.
Francesca wants to look at a second cereal drying oven located in the same area, and one that looks increasingly like it was zoned for the light industrial and food preparation processes that were integral to estate life, but, for obvious reasons, were placed away from the living areas.
We were talking about there being more than one of these corn drying ovens, and this is a really good example, isn't it, Francesca? Just again, can you maybe just explain what's happening here? And I know that actually you can see the effect of the fire on this one at some point.
Compared to the other one that we showed before, this is an intact and most complete example that we have on site. We can see a few of the courses of the structure itself, and obviously we have the entire structure. So again, as I was saying, on the farther side of here, from me, there would have been a fire, and you can still see that the soil is a bit more reddish compared to the other more grey stuff.
Yeah.
And that would have been where the fire was. So the fire will burn down there, produce heat and hot air, and the air will just go around this.
That and then comes up.
And then comes up, yes, and spread more or less evenly.
And this is quite well made, isn't it? As well, there's probably more care than you needed into it.
There is a lot of care. They choose weird enough face stones, so they're very square and nice shaped.
This is something you wouldn't have seen. So after it's in operation,
exactly, yeah. When it's in operation, all of this will be completely hidden, almost underground. So yeah, they really cared about this.
As the dig progresses, some of the complexities and size of this site are becoming clearer. The number of finds increases almost exponentially too, with several hundred late Roman coins coming to light, bringing with them hints at yet another facet to this fascinating villa complex.
Okay, so for Tesco, we're going to have a bit of a numismatic corner. So we're going to look at some of the coins, and there are a lot of coins from this site, aren't there? But you're going to show us just some of the best ones, or some of the ones that help tell this amazing story in its breadth of time.
Yeah, we have, well, at the moment about 350 coins, so it's quite more than what you have in your average site. Obviously, we cannot show all of them. So we have, okay, was one of the most common ones that we have. It's a bronze coin and is a Constantine coin, Constantine the First.
So Constantine the Great, the one that everyone's, the Christianity, And that's 4th century then, early 4th century?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of coins then from the 4th century. That's quite a common find for this site.
Yeah, it seems that the bulk of our coin come from the 4th century.
4th century, so there's a lot of money around that site at this time. Okay.
So this is the one that for now is the most early one and probably will be the earliest one. And it's a Vespasian coin. And it's upside down. Yeah, it's with the eagle with spread wing on the globe.
That's fantastic, may I?
Yeah, sure.
So Vespasian was actually a general for the invasion of Britain. So when he was later emperor, he might have passed through this very area. So it's really cool to find a coin from that era. Okay.
So this coin, it's a bit more special, like the other one that we'll show in a second, as it has, well, it's silver for start, and the other two were bronze. But also you can see it has been clipped on the side.
Oh yeah.
So it will be common to use just fraction of the coin for pin, because a bit different from the modern money that has an intrinsic value.
Yes.
The coins will have like a value for the material that they're forged with. Like,
hence why halfpennies developed, because it would just be a half penny.
Yeah.
So and you can clip off the bits of silver, and then if you get enough little bits of silver, you can melt that down and make something silver yourself. I think that's the reason now why laterally you had milled coins, so people could tell that you weren't clipping around the edges. And they tried that with the Roman coins as well, but obviously people ignored it.
They won't work it. And this is another silver coin. And then this one as well has been clipped and reduced quite a bit.
And that might also maybe indicate that there's less silver coming in as well, potentially.
Exactly.
So you have to, what you get, you try and make last longer. You try and stretch out your supply, essentially, as well. Okay, so not all the coins, as we've seen, some of the coins are clipped, so they're not all whole. But you've got one that's actually even quite different from those clipped coins that we had.
Yeah, so we have a coin that has a hole in it, and this would have been used as pendant. So at some point, this coin meant nothing for whoever was having it, and they turn it in a pendant for a necklace or just for decorating the clothing things.
Because it's precious metal.
Yeah, it would have been shiny and it would be nice to have.
And that potentially, maybe again, this site continuing the post-Roman period, that's when these coins are no longer circulating as cash, but they're just there as something that's a pretty thing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's not something you would spend in the market, but it's something that you want. And it links you back to that Roman past, and it's that connection.
Exactly. It might have been like passed down by generation.
So an heirloom or something. Yeah, this is your granny's.
You tend to find them again in graves, in Saxon graves as well. Like, obviously, for the Saxon, the Roman coin didn't have value as coins.
Yeah.
But they were still shiny, pretty.
And it had the art. Yeah, it's stamped. Yeah. Okay, so it's not everything is shiny that we've got, even though we have a lot of shiny things.
Yeah.
But we've got some amazing ceramics as well, and some of them are actually really quite complete. And I think you've got an example of one of them.
Yeah.
There.
Well, here we have like a very teeny vessel.
Oh.
This wouldn't strictly be used in a daily life. We tend to think that these smaller vases are more related to some kind of votive action.
Okay, so that could maybe be used in a funerary sense?
In a funerary sense, or like if there was like a little shrine on site somewhere, it might have been related to that. Obviously, it's not precious as such. That wouldn't have like cost a lot to the person offering it.
And that makes me think of the urns potentially that were still in the ground that we were looking at earlier. So was this found near them in terms of the overall site?
So in terms of the overall site, this was found in what we think is the corridor of the villa. So it's probably not this proper place of deposition.
Okay.
But we found another one closer to that site.
Fantastic. And I think this is, again, this site is telling us about the full life cycle.
Yep.
It's got many centuries, but it's also just the full life cycle of food, home, and it's also got sort of death and religion as well. So it's just the most fascinating site. From small but fascinating artefacts, I returned to the field where I spoke with Robert about some of the large and complex structures that continue to emerge from the soil.
There are a series of walls. This wall on the north side here, that one, is ever so slightly earlier. It's got a slightly different construction. It doesn't quite match up with the wall that comes along running north-south. So when that was excavated, it was clear from the way that the stone was laid that actually these two walls had been joined up at some subsequent time. But this has a very nice integrated corner. It came all the way down here and then turned again to run north-south. That was all one form of construction. Underneath it is the phase that's older than the villa itself. There's a very large Romano-British ditch, either very late Iron Age or very early Roman. And then cut through the side of it here is another slightly later ditch, but still earlier than the villa. And it runs more or less north-south underneath this wall. So it's the phase of activity immediately before any kind of building was constructed. To get to that, I had to take a slot out through that wall. What I think is particularly interesting is that this clay layer underneath seems to have been put in deliberately as consolidation, because the ground in a ditch that gets wet will be much, much softer, so the wall will start to sink. So it's effectively Roman underpinning, is what that is. And then obviously at some point the villa was demolished. There's a demolition layer sitting on top that comes all the way and seals everything off very nicely, and just appears at the surface there as some plaster poking through the top.
There's something here that you kind of read about in books generally, but don't actually ever get the chance to find. They're kind of noted on Roman sites elsewhere, but I'll just leave it to Francesca just to introduce us to these next objects.
So when first we found this little thing, we were a bit confused because nothing, like we found this quite far away from the villa and nothing really on that part of the site thought about why it was there. But this little object will be usually related with temples again. It's a votive offer to some god. Probably it's an axe, so it will be, in this case, I will go for some agriculture related god. But we don't have just one, we have two and some other fragments.
And I think that would be quite apt for, presumably their wealth is coming from farming.
Yeah.
So maybe the family are making offering to...
For obviously having a good year and not too much rain, a bit drier, a lot of sun, not bad weather, you know.
And it obviously worked, because I think from the wealth that we've been looking at today is that, so I think we all need to pray to this god.
Whatever god was.
Next time you go gardening, just put one of these in and you'll be right as rain. So now, when most people think about Roman ceramics, Roman pottery, they'll think of a type that's kind of colloquially known as Samian ware, but terra siglata. It's a sort of red glazed, very high quality imported type of ceramic, and we've got some wonderful examples, don't we, coming from this site?
So, well, most of the normal one that you'll find on site is completely plain, but as you can see, this one has a stamped figure on it. You can see, the legs, the tail, the face, and what we think is a centaur in running, basically.
That's fantastic. It's almost like feathers or something flowing through the air.
Yeah, they were like some sort of like
showing movement in a way that you can show.
Like, yeah, but she's running with the wind probably.
And again, you're having to import that. That's very expensive.
Yeah, it will come from France.
What is now France? Yeah, France and Germany. So again, this is a site that's connected. We've seen on other finds with the blue that's maybe coming from Afghanistan, and we've got really high grade pottery that's coming from continental Europe. So this is a really kind of a site that would have been known to all the area around because it's so prominent in the landscape, and people here would have known the wider world because they're importing materials from all over.
One fascinating set of finds links the community in and around Brookside Meadows to another wide world, that of religion. The enigmatic artifacts you see here are metal strips that have been carefully rolled into tight scrolls. Made of lead, a toxic metal, they can now only be handled under controlled conditions, as seen here in this speeded up film by conservation specialists Reckon Heritage. But what are they? Well, we consider these rare finds to be what the Romans called defixiones. That is, they're probably curse tablets of the type that had vengeful prayers scratched in them before being deposited at religious centres, with most Romano-British examples found at the Holy Spring at Aquae Sulis, today's Bath, and at the Sanctuary at Ely in Gloucestershire. So far, none of our examples have contained any writing, but this does not mean they weren't curse tablets. Indeed, we know of several blank tablets from both Bath and Ely. And while we don't know why they were left uninscribed, there is the possibility that illiterate individuals bought pre-scroll tablets at shrines and imbued their curses onto them, mentally or verbally, before depositing them with the deity. I'm about to be joined by Francesca and Louis to talk about the scrolls in the context of other finds their team have made, because when archaeologists see such scrolls in an assemblage that includes miniature votive weapons, large volumes of coins, and high-status jewellery, they begin to suspect the presence of a Roman religious focus, or even a temple. Excitingly, there are small-scale parallels between the Brookside Meadows assemblage and Romano-British temple sites like Ely, Lydney, and Farley Heath, where this characteristic range of artefacts are known to be votive offerings. As at Brookside Meadows, Ely's assemblage includes miniature weapons thought to be given to war gods, as was the case with Ely's Mercury cult. Furthermore, Farley Heath's late 3rd to 4th century date range of copper alloy coin offerings, paralleled at many Romano-British temples, also matches the approximately 1,000 such coins found at Brookside Meadows.
There are a few clues that point towards like a ritual site. Maybe not a full-blown temple, but more like a rural shrine. We know that like rural shrine in UK doesn't need to be anything. They won't leave anything different on the soil than a normal house, basically. And especially our north building as a shape that, in its earliest form, can be related to the plans of other sites that we know.
There is potential that something evolved on site that might have had a ritual function. But again, if we're talking about a very wealthy family or dynasty or whatever that's located on site, they would have had a family shrine as well. Whether that sort of gets used by the locality and not just reserved for the family might be because they are so wealthy and that there does seem to be quite a bit of trade coming through, that it's merging between what would be like a family cult shrine and one that's a local cult shrine.
There are hundreds of coins, aren't there? Were there 300-400 plus coins of these later Roman 3rd, 4th century copper alloy coins that you tend to find deposited at shrines? Is that correct, Francesca?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're like borderline the 1,000 coin on site. So yeah, the more we explore and the more we keep digging, the more of these coins we find. Again, they're not located in a specific area, so it seems to be everywhere, like in similar quantities on the building side, on the building part of the site. But yeah, we have quite a lot of them, and they are related to shrines of temples.
there is a focus on site, definitely towards the eastern side. Like Francesca says, it's around those buildings, but it's not like we've got we do our density charts and we're not finding that there's a particular spike. It's just all around where the Roman occupation is. So it's hinting that basically they are attached to the buildings and those later coins are in use in that area. But again, probably moved around quite a lot with post-Roman sort of, they've demolished the buildings, there's been a bit of moving around there. And then you've got later agricultural planning would have moved a fair bit around.
Something to ponder as we return to Louis on site.
What do you think is going on here and how does it relate to the rest of the site? We've got some very obvious brickwork here, we've got some walls. What is happening here, do you think?
Well, we're still in the middle of one of the larger buildings that's part of this villa complex. So we're potentially in sort of the west wing, which is this building sort of goes off that direction. And then the north building's over there. We believe, and we don't have a direct comparison just yet, but we believe the brickwork that you're seeing is part of a hypercourse, so an underfloor Roman heating. Okay, yeah.
And how does that, if we look down at it, did you get that because you've almost got like platforms and there's this is where the hot air goes between?
Yeah, you've got to imagine that a lot of this site, because we're only getting that level that we've got it, that it's probably been truncated over time by tractors and just modern agriculture. It's probably clipped the top off. So what we've got is the bottom surviving, and there are some examples on the continent showing CBM or brickwork like this being used for quite fancy hypercore systems. So we think we might have the remnants of that surviving here.
So this is going to be quite a high status room then if they're heating it like that, because I think we've also found quite a lot of the painted wall plaster here. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's we found that pretty much everywhere, and tesserae over in the corner as well. So they've got mosaics, they've got underfloor heating. It might be that it's just survived here, and the likelihood is, well, potentially it had underfloor heating in a lot more of the rooms, but here is where we've definitely got it, and it goes from that room through to there and potentially to the back when we expose it.
I think we can take a walk over there now because there's quite a lot of interesting developments going on there at the moment because it's currently being dug. I think what we're seeing here is a lot of, there would have been wall, this is the foundations of a wall, and this is actually some actual Roman remaining wall here, that's correct?
So that's upstanding, we've got a little bit there left. The majority of this site is just the foundations, the absolute lower course. You can see the herringbone pattern that they've got, especially over there on that section. So that's the base layer for the Roman walls. And where it dips down there, we believe, because we've got a bulk section over on the side, that this is a robber trench, and after this goes out of use, locals have turned up and taken out all of the stone and robbed it. So we're left with what we've got so far.
And often when you find a villa that's collapsed, you get a lot of, for want of a better word, roof tile. And I've been told that there's not a huge amount of roof tile on this site. Does that suggest maybe it was kind of systematically maybe taken apart?
We should have a lot more considering the finds we've got. We've got a lot of box tile, which is again with the hypercore systems. We're missing those tegulae, which is the very typical Roman clay-fired tiles. Or, potentially, it's not beyond the realms that it could have had thatch or something else. So, but given that we've got robbed walls, the likelihood is that they probably dismantled it and took it somewhere else.
And the thing I'm kind of interested in, as you know, is what happens afterwards. We've got a lot of potentially what looks like rubble here. Is this a wall that's collapsed or is it later reuse? There appears to be, I don't know if you want to, we go over and have a look at some of the details over here, because I think to my mind this doesn't look very Roman, but there seems to be something going on. There seems to be almost like circular, semicircular features, and there's areas there and there that are kind of raised and look like almost sort of clay. I don't know.
At the moment we've basically got a mix of this is still quite high up, and potentially a lot of that is more than likely it's wall tumble, so it's after the disuse. I don't think we've got necessarily structures, but mixed in between that you can see that there's a dark brown that's going through here. Might have something to do with the hypercore system.
Okay.
And again, that's sat slightly higher, and that's actually in situ, and so is that little pad there. So these little things here, the mortar or plaster that you've got here. We've got another one that's surviving over there, and that's directly on top of this brown stuff. This stuff is probably yet to clear away, and I think this is more than likely because you've got remnants of box tile here. You can see where the keying pattern is for them to be able to put it into the walls. I think a lot of this is basically after the building's been used and it's been dismantled, and this is basically what they didn't want to use or rob out of the building. But we need to just slowly go for it, keep the sections in place, and just see before we're certain that we need to basically remove it and carry on.
And one thing that strikes me again, coming around here, and we were speaking earlier about, was the quality of these foundations. They're almost like better than they need to be. Have you ever come across any parallels to just how well built this particular wall is? This looks like it's a feature wall almost. It's
this is fairly new, and Phil's been working on this, so it looks like on this section alone anyway that there's an awful lot of chalk foundation that's going to some depth, and it might be, because we're not seeing that elsewhere, it might be that they've found a soft spot. It might be inside a ditch and they've had to fill it up nicely and basically put like almost a retaining or a revetment wall in there to support the rest of the structure.
And supporting the rest of the structure, because we see a lot of reconstructions, drawings of Roman villas in Britain, and what I've read is you can maybe sense by the width of a wall whether there's just one or two stories. Are you getting a sense that there are going to be 2 stories on this sort of wall?
These are substantial load-bearing walls, so there's a very, very high chance that the majority of this building was 2 stories at least. The angle over here as well, coming through, it's more obvious from this side, I believe.
I think, yeah, you're looking down here.
Yeah, so if you look along here, you can see the angle of the stones are all going that direction, and then on the opposite side, they're also going that direction as well. And that's herringbone or opus spicatum, and that's basically, it's a load-bearing technique the Romans used for foundations. So it actually gives a lot of flex to the building, but it holds it steady, so it's not rigid and liable to snap. It gives a little bit of flex to the building and makes sure it doesn't subside.
So this is kind of like leading engineering as well as being a sort of huge investment financially. They've got good engineers working on these.
So the Romans worked out that this is the best way to build things. So more often than not, you go through all of Italy or any sort of Roman structures, they'll all have this foundation.
Louis, we've been looking at the underfloor heating. We've looked at a beautiful, well-built wall. We've talked about this being a villa, and of course, what people might be expecting on a villa is mosaics. Do we have any evidence for mosaics?
We do have mosaics, but not evidence enough for the pretty nice pictures that we've got. We've got a fairly standard orange and white pieces, and just on the overburden here, you can see we've got a few examples. So they're not the pretty little pieces that you see on the lovely National Geographic publications, but it's
going to be geometric shapes and sort of blocky sort of.
This is quite rudimentary, but we've got kilograms and kilograms of these, but these are basically lying on the overburden, so they've been churned up. So we don't have an in situ floor, but we've got potentially the sub base for where they were sat, and we found collections of these in the rooms piled up. So there's a couple there. If you do look around, it does look like potentially the ploughs come through and removed them, unfortunately, but we've got the trace evidence for it.
So, Lee, we've come to another part, just slightly to the east of where we've been looking at the hypocausts, and we've been looking at the concentrations of tesserae. But the walls over here kind of are looking different to the walls over there, and you've got a sort of feature there that kind of catches the eye. What's the sort of the initial potential interpretation of what might be happening here?
Really, I should have started you here, because this is potentially the front entrance. So back here behind me, you'll see that the walls extend slightly further back than what we've got here. The likelihood is that this is your front entrance. These are the wings, of the building that sort of come out front ways, and you enter here. And quite often, the front doors or the entrances at the front be single story, so it's a lot thinner at this front end. And then you see as you go progressively back, you get that very big foundation wall. So those would be the two-story part of the building. That bit there, it looks
Have a look, yeah.
looks slightly higher, so it might have been potentially. It's just ended up slightly square, but it does look high. So if you look very closely, you can see that depth of the dark soil here does look to actually extend over the top of that. So it might have been part of the robbing of this. So later, again, destruction of the building. And I would actually go for that interpretation because it's sat slightly high, and you can see if this was to continue here and they've left those rocks in for the moment, they are actually sat above that foundation. So I think this is probably part of the robber's trench and what's left over.
And just a little bit about, for the viewer maybe doesn't know much about robber trenches and why people are doing it. Could you explain why people are coming to Roman sites and making such an effort to dig out these stones?
So it's a ready supply of material. Instead of you going and barreling into a rock face to get material that you can use to build structures, if you've got a freestanding building that's already got both face stone and stone ready for the building, it's much easier for you to turn out with a cart, tip a wall over, and then just load it into the cart and take it away.
And this would be going to maybe early medieval churches, as often happens.
We often find bits of Roman reused into early medieval and later medieval churches. It's more often than not. See the orange slab there?
Oh yeah.
Got that would be Roman pedalis. It's like the Roman version of a paving slab. It's the only one we found in situ on its own. It's a bit unusual. It's very high up. It might be coincidental, but below them there was a pair of twins or babies, two at least, that were buried underneath. So it might have been a marker. We don't know. It's just very unusual.
This looks again different to what we've just been looking at, and certainly something very different seems to be happening in the centre. What do we think is going on there, and what are those bits of metallic items there?
So this is part of the north wing. Again, it's a winged corridor type building, and it's in the progress, and unfortunately it's been flooded out, so excuse that. But the stonework that you can see out there, it's orange and it's been tinged with heat. And at the bottom of that collection of stones, we found, and they're still there, large metal objects. It's actually smelted lead.
What process has happened here then? They've set a fire. This is the heat that's affected these rocks, hence why they've gone orange and slightly crumbly. And this is maybe the lead that's poured through the cracks that they've not bothered to.
You don't need a lot of heat with lead. Almost none at all. So the likelihood is that this was some sort of heating structure, but they used it right at the end for smelting lead. And it's sort of pooled at the bottom of this. Not unfortunately, but we've already recorded half of this. So this is why it's in this heap. But you've got one side of this, the channel was underneath those rocks. And these were basically found around about here together.
And do you think this is connected to the lead? We're calling them curse tablets at the moment. That we've seen them already on the film. Is maybe that's something that's linked to the manufacture of those?
A lovely story if it was. And hopefully we get to the bottom of it when we finish excavating. There's a lot of charcoal in that, so you can tell that they've basically got loads of charcoal heaped up and then just banged a load of lead in there, and that's the pool that's formed at the bottom.
And if they're happy to let that much go for lots, the volume must be pretty enormous of what they're trying to do there.
I mean, lead was a commodity. They had a lot of it, and they knew what to do with it. I mean, you find lead pipework, same as we do for underfloor, plumbing. So it wasn't that they wouldn't use it. There was a lot of it around, but they didn't also made jewellery out of it. So there are lead brooches, and we found an example of one of those on site.
I'm about to be joined by Francesca and Louis again, as I'd like to ask them about the lead smelter in the context of other known or potential evidence for later Roman activity at Brookside Meadows, and the possibility of activity continuing into even essentially post-Roman 5th century and later. In terms of later Roman activity, it might be the case that the corn dryers we've seen at Brookside Meadows reflect the phenomenon of many grand Romano-British villa complexes that became increasingly focused on manufacturing and crop processing over mere elite display as the Roman period progressed. Beyond the multitude of late Roman coins, perhaps the best evidence for late Roman activity at Brookside Meadows is our horse-headed Type 1B buckle, which dates to between AD 350 and 450. Such clothing accessories are noticeable for being associated not only with Roman elites who were in the late Roman army or in a form of military chic wished to be associated with the prestige of it, but they were also associated with some of the earliest Anglo-Saxon furnished burials, suggesting this buckle type remained fashionable and in circulation well into the 5th century. And as we've seen with the lead smelter and mystery feature, Brookside Meadows also shows evidence for deconstruction of the buildings and reuse of architectural elements in ad hoc industrial structures, seemingly around the time of the end of Roman Britain, or perhaps even after.
I think that definitely there is some activity that happens in the 4th century. As I said, like the brooch is one of the main indicators, but again, the corn dryer is still there. We can see in the corn dryer, like they reuse parts of the CBM material from the villa, mainly the box style that would have been used for the hypocaust. But even like the lead smelter is made mainly by roof tiles. So yeah, for sure there is an activity. And if we don't want to go for like a positive archaeology, we have at least 4 or 5 ditches crossing on top of the buildings, and these are being filled partially with destruction materials, but obviously you won't have these ditches if your building are still standing and going strongly.
There's definitely a hiatus at the end of the 4th. I mean, we've got an awful lot of finds from the 4th century, not so much of the 5th, but they're still there and around, and we're still finding signs of that all the way up until, I think we have a very nice coin at sort of 1066 or something around about that date. I think that the likelihood is that the Romans have established trackways, and we've got a couple of them to the west, and the movement of traffic in that area, because we've got a brook to the east of the villa. So the likelihood is that the Romans have established a through route through there, and it's continued to be used. And it might also be one of the reasons, or more than likely one of the reasons, why the site becomes so wealthy is because it's got a lot of traffic coming through there. So it definitely tails off at the 4th century, but we definitely got. It's not abandoned from that point onwards. We've definitely got archaeological cut features that are showing that the stratigraphically wise, they're still there.
So, we've been looking a lot at, the corn drying ovens, so we've been looking at the sort of sustenance, the sort of life-giving parts of this site, but there's evidence coming through now that we've maybe got the full spectrum, and we've got maybe death and burial represented. So, Francesca, you just tell us a little bit about potentially what this is and how it was found, because it wasn't found sort of just by digging. It was found, maybe it was metal detecting that found it?
Yeah, we found this pottery by metal detecting, as you were saying, and it's a full vessel that has been broken, obviously. But what is curious about this, that has been repaired in antiquity, and they used this lump of material is lead, and they used it for gluing back together 2 pieces of pottery. So maybe there was not much pottery coming in.
This is like an heirloom piece that's maybe... you're in a period where they're not making so much of it, so it's maybe a later Roman period or post-Roman, or...
Maybe they had few pieces and they wanted to keep it.
Okay.
The few that they have, instead of throwing them away as easily as before. But usually also when we found vessel of this kind in what seems to be a little pit dug, it's connected to cremations.
Okay.
So we didn't dig it out as yet, so we cannot be sure, but it might be a little cremation. And especially connected to this pile of rocks. Obviously we didn't dig it yet.
But it's potentially person shaped.
Like,
okay, yeah.
It's a rectangular, more or less person high. It might be a grave that they just covered up with a number of stones.
And this is maybe outside, we were talking earlier, maybe the boundary ditch is over where Piotr is now.
Exactly. This side will be where you anyway expect to find graves, especially if as they thought there is a road, well, there was a road running where the fence line is now.
Okay.
You will find graves next to the road and outside the boundary of the villa itself.
People know the Appian Way leading out of the
Yeah.
settlement. That's where you tended, so they knew people were
Exactly.
passing, and often you get. It's quite interesting on some Roman tombstones. It says "Traveller, stop," and read about my life. So they wanted to be visible in death. So maybe, as Francesca says, this is where this is happening. Plus, it's on the north side as well, and so the south side where you've got maybe your nice gardens, you're not putting you're putting the burials in. So this is maybe a zoning of the site that's happening here, because it's not just one.
not
I think
just
we have
one,
another one. I think you showed me earlier.
Yeah, there is another one, potentially other two in this area, and this one it's also full pottery, but also there is another one here that's a little bit less full, but it might have been damaged by plowing or any other agricultural activity. And it's also interesting that there is a jawbone of an animal, so might be an offering.
Okay.
Might
Yes.
be just
Yeah.
circumstantial.
And that's so it's essentially, I think this site, it tells us everything. It tells us, Francesca was telling us, you've got the full range of Roman occupation. You've got pre-Roman occupation finds of the coins that were coming over before the Romans invaded, but then you've also got that 5th century coin as well. But you've got life and you've got death. You've got food production, and you've got potentially, we've maybe got a cemetery here as well. So maybe this is the cemetery of the family that are living in the villa that we're uncovering at the moment.
It's been a few months since we were at Monk's Farm, although as a site we now know it internationally as Brookside Meadows, the name of the Barratt and David Wilson Homes development for which we are doing the archaeological work on. And I wanted to catch up with the diggers to see what has been happening since we've been away.
So yeah, since last year when you were there, so much has happened. We exposed more of the buildings, we exposed more of the rest of the site, so lots of Iron Age round houses and enclosure have been are now visible, and so we learned much more about the general landscape and progression through history about the Brookside Meadow.
So the background pre the Roman buildings that we've got on site is starting to get a lot more dense. We've got a lot of Iron Age occupation, and it's not stopping. It's spreading off into the distance for quite a way. So it might be, that's the story why we've got these big Roman buildings is that it was a well-established, quite substantial Iron Age site before the Romans arrived.
This has been a particularly difficult winter, like the rain and the sheer amount of water that we had to deal with has been, never seen before. Something that as bad as this winter, the client has been very understanding of the condition of the site, and the team has been amazing. Like they never really stopped. They've been there every day. They deal with a lot, and they've been great in general. It was for sure an interesting experience. Like I never really thought that a site that I've been on would have been gone so famous and so around the world. It was quite I have friends that live in America, and they had, the news over there, and they were like, "Is this yours?" It's like, "Yeah, that's ours," and so on. So, but again, also from the locals, they keep stopping us and ask questions about how the site is going, what progress we're making, and these kind of things. So it's been very nice.
I think it was less interviews for me, but my picture managed to get into various articles around, holding the little votive axe, which happened to be a random occurrence. When we found that, I happened to be on site and photographed it. So
and that was one of the finds, that the axe and the horse-headed brooch, for example, and some of the wonderful painted plaster. And there's so many great finds, but these were some of the finds that we actually took to local community because we had this international exposure, but we also acted, as it were, hyper locally. So can you tell us a little bit about the experience you had when we took the finds and we took a presentation to the local villagers?
Yeah, as I was saying, like the locals, like the local villagers and the people that live around Brookside Meadows are very interesting. And they were the first to know, like when we did the talk at the local church hall, and since then they kept asking questions. Every time they go to the shops, they stop us and recognizing like we have archaeologists brought on the back, so they know who to ask to and who to stop. And then we went also to the school, the local primary school, and that was, the kids were very interested. They asked a lot of questions, and it was quite nice again.
And Louis, have you been asked for autographs as well? It sounds like Francesca and Robert and various of our colleagues are now celebrities in the local area.
I'm not there enough, so it's Francesca's site, so I don't have to deal with the publicity so much. But it was lovely to see all the people that turned up at that church hall, and they got to see the finds right in front of their face. So they did enjoy it. A lot of questions. So
cool. And I think there are still lots of questions about the site, but we know you guys are still working on it. So maybe after this documentary, we will get you for a podcast, and a few months in the future we might find out even more, but that is for the future. For now, we leave you with a final thought from Brookside Meadows.
I think the lesson we should perhaps take away from the Monk's Farm site is it's not just this immensely wealthy Roman villa site, and that's exceptional in and of itself, but it's also a site that's telling us about this period used to be called the Dark Ages, this early medieval, this post-Roman or sub-Roman period when people are just trying to navigate their way through difficult times, but they have to live. People are living, they're eating, they're preparing food, and they're dying. And as we've probably seen, there's evidence of repurposing, there's evidence of reuse. Here, for example, we've got melting down of lead, and it's reused Roman material inside what is a Roman room. So you're just seeing people living their daily lives in a period with no of the old certainties. So Monk's Farm is a lesson really, again, for our own times, that things change, often dramatically, but people make do and people get on with their lives. So I think it's a fantastic lesson what archaeology can teach us about not just the past, but also today.